Let's burn this place to the ground. You must grow up.
Why are you gonna make me throw my mug at you?
Welcome to part 2 of my analysis of language in Severance. If you missed part 1, please check it out so you will understand what I'm talking about. And now let's get straight into the remaining cult manipulation techniques in Severance. Number 7, the bite model. Here we have 4 categories: behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. When it comes to behavior, cult leaders regulate your actions. See, for instance, the MDR handbook, containing rules follow in the office, which are strictly related to Kier's teachings. They even call it corporate canon in the show. When Irv describes the Eagan lineage of the 8 CEOs to Helly, he says,
I have a mnemonic poem to help you remember their names. I authored it myself, and of course it falls outside corporate canon.
And when Helly finds Beatty's map in Mark's desk, we hear Dylan say, I thought we weren't supposed to make maps. And Helly asks, why aren't we supposed to map the office? And Mark replies, it's an Eagan rule. Render not my creation in miniature. When it comes to information, it's certainly limited, and in Severance it's limited to what Lumen allows. And you see this clearly when a book from the outside world is found on the 7th floor. Irv says it's an emergency, and Dylan goes, it's just raining contraband today, because it was the same day as they found the map. And they keep looking at this book, and Mark says, has anyone seen anything like this before? And that's when we get the true believer, Irving, who recites passage 31, page 110. Be content in my words, and dally not in the scholastic pursuit of lesser men. And Mark goes, no books except the handbook, I know. And even better is Irv's reply, I bet it's a loyalty test. This is an idolatrous text that should be brought to him immediately, referring to Milchick. Because at first, the idea of attempting to read this book doesn't even cross their minds. And when it comes to thought, repetition of slogans causes cognitive conditioning. We even hear Cobell saying to Grainer,
The surest way to tame a prisoner is to let him believe he's free.
And here we, of course, have the famous phrase that Mark gives Helly.
Work is mysterious and important,
which now has become a meme. It's extremely popular and recognizable. And he continues, showing how deeply he still believes in this doctrine.
and we deal with the uncertainty it brings us in the way that Kier would have wanted, together, as a family.
And we already mentioned in the previous video the sense of belonging that comes with this kind of indoctrination. And we hear multiple times Kier's recordings, for instance in the Perpetuity Wing, say things such as, should you tame the tempers as I did mine, then the world shall become but your appendage. And finally, when it comes to emotional control, we have Milchick talking to outie Mark and saying, Miss Cobell, what we learned tonight is that she is quite severely unwell, and her behavior at Lumen seems to be the source of your innie's distress, blaming the victim, as we saw in the previous video as well, which is a classic cult tactic. But we also hear Helena say to Miss Cobell, I hear ego, hubris, arrogance. Kier teaches us they only cause pain. And when Dylan says something he's not supposed to, we hear Milchick reply, careful Dylan, words have consequences. I'd hate to rescind certain privileges. I believe part of this emotional control is the way in which they treat innies in general, that is, as children. See, for instance, whenever Milchick says something to the innies, especially in the first season, they tend to obey, or even if they ask questions, there's a certain degree of respect or fear. And even when he says something like, on you go, as in the case of Miss Casey, who is being sent to retirement, or when she is suddenly back in the hallway and doesn't really know why after her retirement, and he goes, on you go, and she obeys. But also something like the outie that sees his innie as a child. See, for instance, Mark in the very last episode of season 2, he says to Devon, he's an effing child, he won't listen. Innies are perceptual versions of a person. The Innies repeat formulas, slogans, as we said, and anything they were fed since stepping on the 7th floor. As we just saw, they are not allowed books, other than Lumen-approved texts, which are also manufactured by Lumen. Among the Innies, at least at the beginning, Irving is the most indoctrinated, and that's quite funny because we see that his outie is the one who knows the most about Lumen, or who's trying to find out what's behind the company, just as Devon and Marc start doing in season 2. They call it company espionage. Well, Irving has been doing it, at least for a while. And this is why, for all Innies, Rickon's book is revolutionary. It's nothing like Lumen's publications. Each Innie found a different way to survive and justify their existence on the 7th floor. And accepting indoctrination is one way to help justify something that doesn't really have an explanation. Mainly because Innies are not given the truth. They are just told a story. See, for instance, whenever something happens to their bodies, a scratch or even worse, their outies are given a note, and Lumen can write anything on it, since outies don't have a way to verify it and Innies cannot communicate with their outies. Something that is childish and sometimes should be cherished is the ability to be surprised and appreciate even the simplest things. See, for instance, when Irving meets Bert for the very first time, they discuss designs, and Bert says most people think of O&D when new handbook totes come in, and Irving goes,
Well, I love those too.
on top of the paintings, and Bert goes,
There's new ones coming next month.
best design yet, in my view, and Irving goes,
Wow. Now that's all I'll be thinking about until then.
Since in season 1 Helly keeps trying to escape, MDR decides to take her on a little trip to the Perpetuity Wing. And again, this is a very specific name to call, I don't know, Lumen Eagan Museum. And at this point is when we, viewers, finally find out about some lore behind Lumen and Severance in general. But here you can see their different approaches, but also those who are in awe and reverence, just like in any cult. Even Dylan goes, that's not fair, I've been reverent as shit. And in the background during the whole little trip, we hear Kier Eagan's voice. It is this great and consecrated power that I hope to pass on to all of you, my children. There are so many times in which we hear the word child or children to address both Innies and workers in general at Lumen, but also all those who Lumen wants to reach. Helly even refers to Milchick as their babysitter. And when Irving is given some facts about his outie that really make him happy, just as a child would be, because these are simple things that he only can learn about in these wellness sessions, that's when Miss Casey stops him, so he cannot really enjoy them as much, because she says,
I'm sorry. Please try to enjoy each fact equally.
And he even loses points if he enjoys one fact more than the other, which is again kind of gamification that actually reminds me more of a children's game rather than the gamification I mentioned regarding Dylan. And when Milchick finds MDR visiting O&D, you see them scared, but you also hear Marc saying,
Not children, Mr. Milchick, we didn't do anything wrong.
Knowing all too well that they will be punished. And a slightly terrifying dialogue we hear is James talking to Helly, who he thinks is Helena, and he's reminiscing of the prototype of the chip, which used to be blue and green, and says, I remember you said, it's so pretty, Daddy. Everybody in the whole world should get one. And he replied, they will, because of you. They'll all be Kier's children. So it sounds like it's the ultimate goal. And one of the best sentences from the whole show, in my opinion, is, of course, said by Milchick when he's talking to Miss Huang and saying, "This will mean using your time well, focusing on your own duties and eradicating from your essence childish folly." And addressing adults as if they were children is something that we see even outside of Kier's town. When Miss Cobell visits Sissy and she says, "Child, do not test me," and then goes, "Return and plead forgiveness, child. The Eagans will grant it." Again, as if this godlike figure was also everybody's father, which again sounds like some religions and cults. Number 8, trauma bonding. This means that members of a cult depend on one another and often share experiences. This seems to be true for the innies after getting accustomed to the severed floor, rather than for their outies to trauma bond before choosing Severance. So it's not the reason behind their choice, it's how they bond over the trauma of being innies. See, for instance, when they first meet the goat people, Lawrence says that's not a mammalian's problem, and Mark says it's an innie problem if Lumon kills Miss Casey, and then goes, "Listen, we used to be afraid of other departments too." And we see Helly trying to bond with choreography and merriment in the same way towards the end of the season. And while visiting O&D, we hear Bert saying something like,
Irving, Kier would want us to feel the warm embrace of knowledge and truth. That way we could be true partners in its teachings.
Number 9, the process of indoctrination. Once again, Irving is a great example when he says, "I know all 9 core principles," and when he's asked, "Which is your favorite?" he says, "All 9. And when Irving is worried about Helly, who's trying to escape, he thinks she's looking for deeper meaning and suggests a trip to the Perpetuity Wing. And Mark is a little bit of a skeptic compared to the true believer who is Irving, because he says something like,
She can read about all that stuff in the handbook.
whereas Irving says
That place is everything.
the one place that Mark was diminishing. And we see doctrine written all over the place on the 7th floor and in the main building at Lumon. Stuff like, "Let not your weakness live in your veins." And another way in which you can indoctrinate is through persuasive speeches and grandeur. See, for instance, Drummond, who says, "Look, Seth, Mark Scout's completion of Cold Harbor will be remembered as one of the greatest moments in the history of this planet." And once Mark has completed the file, we can read a card gets directly from Kier's hand, in which we read, "Godly splendors await upon your victory," as well as Kier's wax statue, who says, "You have drawn my grand agendum nearer to fulfillment," thus making you one of the most important people in history. And innies, but also believers in general, can be persuaded to commit crimes in the name of the cult. See, for instance, Lorne, who says, "Mammalians nurturable brings an offering," and Drummond goes, "We commit this animal to Kier and his eternal war against pain." But then you can hear doubt in Lorne's voice when she asks,
How many more must I give?
and the true believer in this case is Drummond, who says,
As many as the founder calls.
something that really sounds out of this world is whatever Sissy says. For instance, when she says, "Sold to the poor," and later she says, "That room stays shut until all who remember her sit with Kier." Or even worse, "Why do you bring nothing but woe into my life?" We mentioned institutionalized religions in the past video, but we also see this interesting discussion of an innie who goes to heaven compared to the outie who burns in hell. And we hear this discussion when Fields, Bert and Irving are having dinner, and it's interesting because Fields says as if he'd been listening to our conversation, and then he says what the priest said. And if you remember, Lumon listens. This was clear in the first episode of season 2, in which we even hear the innies discussing this issue, not sure whether Lumon stopped listening finally, or if Lumon listens to their needs. Number 10. Exploitation of vulnerabilities. This is linked to point 5. This doesn't only apply to adults, but children as well as entire families and towns. Children, though, are the most vulnerable and easy to indoctrinate. As we hear Hampton say to Miss Cobell, colleagues, child effing labor. This wasn't clear in the first season, but we explored it more in the second one, both through Miss Cobell's story and through Miss Huang. And when Devon suggests that she should call Miss Cobell, Regabi replies,
"She's Lumen through and through. She was raised by them. She's a soldier."
And even though we still don't really know what's Miss Cobell's agenda, we are starting to think that maybe she can be trusted a little bit more now in the second season and possibly the third one rather than the first one, because she changed her mind. But of course there are other vulnerabilities that can be exploited, such as grief, sadness, a sense of inadequacy, and so on, which are the reasons why our protagonists ended up on the severed floor in the first place. And the same goes for Gemma, who we still don't know whether she willingly joined a trial or was kidnapped. Either way, it happened after a major trauma. Number 11. Us versus them mentality. Loaded language simplifies complex ideas into emotionally charged phrases designed to elicit strong automatic responses. This is clear in the depiction of each severed department. They fear and hate each other because of the lies they were fed. A funny example is that mammalians and OND believe that MDR have pouches on their bellies.
Like they say, you all have pouches. Pouches? Like to carry young? Yes.
And the one who believes these lies the most is Dylan, who thinks that they do not share the same values, and says,
Kier sorted the departments by virtue, macrodats are clever and true, while OND is more cruelty-centered.
OND tried a violent coup on the others decades ago.
Why do they keep us all so far apart now?
That's an absolute fiction.
This mentality applies to other oppositions as well, in which each part feels unique and superior. Innies versus outies, severed versus non-severed individuals, here Lumen believers and non-believers. Number 12. Identity fusion. This is loss of individuality, and we see it partially because severed employees adopt specific uniforms, use homogeneous products, all Lumen branded of course. They have access to the same limited resources and information, yet they can still be distinguished in their achievements. So each one of them can have their little toys and prizes. They all feel like they belong. They share values and they work together towards the same goal, since Kier's original vision was to see them all working together. And when Irving is admiring Kier Eagan,
"Come now, children of my industry, and know the children of my blood."
and when we see outie Dylan looking for a job, the interviewer says, "And then Lumen," and they make their doors in-house. It's effing hubris, because this is common in other cults as well, to use products that are either made by the company or by affiliated companies and people who agree with the views of the cult. So basically you are supporting businesses that support your ideals. Number 13. Deception. Gaslighting through language using denial and contradiction, misinformation. Innies can be told basically anything because they cannot verify it, and their knowledge of the outside world is limited. When Helly is in front of the audience at the gala, she says everything they told you about Severance is a lie, but people thought she was joking. And we can see lies all over the place in this show. See for instance one of Gemma's Innies who is tortured on the plane, and Dr. Mauer, disguised as Stewart, says, "It's okay, this is perfectly normal." And a little later on the same day, he tells Gemma, "Your husband remarried last year, and he has a daughter now," which of course is a complete lie. And even though this is outies Gemma, she still cannot verify his words. And when Miss Casey is told that she is about to retire, she asks Milchick, "Do you know if I'm happy up there?" And he says, "Of course."
You do all sorts of wonderful things.
And his big smile is one perfect way to hide his lies. Or maybe, since we know him at this point, to reveal them. Or even when he lies about how long has passed since season 1 ended, and he says it's 5 months while only a few days have passed. Or trying to convince Marc that his outie was begging to return to the floor. And when MDR finally proves mammalians that they do not have pouches on their bellies, one of them still says proves nothing, because they still want to believe the lies they were fed about other departments. Or during Orbo, Irving asks, did his brother really die that way, Mr. Milchick? And he replies, the handbook enriches our work with tales of the founder's life. Every word is truth. And more often than not, when Innies ask questions, they're not given answers, they are dismissed, or they get straight up lies. See, for instance, when Gemma asks, so what happens once I've been in all the rooms? Dr. Mauer goes, you will see the world again, and the world will see you. So this may make sense in his own views, because this still applies to his beliefs, where she has no idea what he's talking about. And she asks, so I'll see Marc? And he goes on, Marc will benefit from the world you are siring. So we hear this word twice, which is from Old English, and it means fathering. And as we know, at this point, she had a miscarriage. So he doesn't mean procreating in that sense, and this has a specific meaning to Lumon itself, as we heard James use this word as well. And he keeps going with these weird words. Kier will take away all his pain just as Kier has taken away yours. And Gemma goes, can you please just talk like a normal person? She's truly confused. But people in Severance are lied to so often, to the point that some of them start questioning everything. For example, when Marc doesn't trust anybody in season 2, Helly has to tell him, this is real, not everything here is a lie. She doesn't know how to prove him that she's there, she cares for him, and so on. And Marc, talking to his outie, says, assuming that's even real. Assuming every word out of your mouth isn't a lie.
I'm sorry, outies are...
They're us on the outside.
Racism and derogatory language. It's not clear from the beginning which are the correct terms that we are supposed to use when talking about severed people. And we hear this kind of confusion on the news. When the spokesperson says worky, Natalie sounds offended.
Okay, first of all, worky?
And the other goes,
that, as I understand, is the preferred term.
I think it's exactly the condescending verbiage that I'd expect from a group trying to save people from their own choices.
And the spokesperson goes,
choices. Did her Inzi have a choice?
And where are you getting these terms?
And the spokesperson doesn't really know what to do anymore, and they say,
call it someone who's had their brain split in half.
Innies are not even considered human. They are slaves. And some Lumon employees don't even consider them human. While in the outside world, Lumon sells this procedure as liberating, focusing on the outie's experience, who is free from working. Helena has a strong opinion about this and says that they are effing animals. And when Miss Huang says, may I say a question? She says, you shouldn't let them have a funeral. It makes them feel like people. And Drummond reminds Milchick, I think it's time to go back to the basics, to remember these severed workers' greater purpose, and to treat them as what they really are. And when Helly is finally back on the floor during season 2, she complains about Helena, who stole her body and her identity, and says she dresses me like I'm a baby, that she controls me and this company and all of us. It's disgusting. And later on, Helly reminds Dylan, like all the outies treat us, like everything's for them, when he's rejected by his outie's wife. And you can see these Innies having identity crisis. Dylan says at the end of the day, we are still stuck down here with no lives and no family. And Helly blames Dylan because they convinced him to turn his back for some outy woman he doesn't even know. And one of the most popular phrases I mentioned in part 1 is when Helly is addressing choreography and merriment and says,
They give us half a life and think we won't fight for it.
Sometimes it's not even discrimination towards innies, it's simply a non-standardized terminology. Because we hear Rickon use the term worky and Milchick use the term work personage, but also Regabi, who says,
I hate that term, Minnie. So infantilizing.
But the most obvious case of discrimination towards an innie is when Dylan is sent back home because the interviewer didn't know that he was severed until they discussed in the interview. And Dylan says, that's it? Just because I'm severed? Okay, you're not considering me at all. That's discrimination. Some of the most painful scenes to watch are the ones that show us racism towards employees, and mostly towards Milchick. He's the main victim, but not the only one. Do you remember when everybody online started calling him Milkshake? Simply because in a brief instance, we hear Mark W. ask about Mr. Milchick addressing him as Milkshake. And that didn't spread in the show, rather in real life. Just think of when the board was jubilant at Milchick's ascendance. They wanted him to feel appreciated, so they gave him a gift that was creepy, to say the least. And Natalie says, please accept from the board these inclusively recanonicalized paintings intended to help you see yourself in Kier, our founder. And Milchick replies, oh my. And there are many videos on YouTube about this specific topic only, so maybe I'll share a couple below. But you can tell that poor dear Mr. Milchick is trying to react as they hope, not to offend anybody, which is ironic, of course. But you can also see how Drummond specifically treats Milchick. And during his review, he says, 1.
He uses too many big words.
And Milchick goes,
Well, perchance I may colloquially employ.
And he's stopped right there and then. But this is because being a black man in that society, he is not supposed to use complex language or to sound more educated or in a higher position than he is compared to white people in the company. And that's one of the reasons why Drummond treats him like that. And the final discussion they have is one of the most powerful. And I think this scene will be used as an example for years to come in cinema and TV. So this is Tightening the Leash, our most vital refiner missing in the wind on what was to be Lumon's finest day.
This is your fault.
And Milchick, I have followed protocol, Mr. Drummond.
But I thank you for your remonstration.
And Drummond.
Needlessly complex word for a simple idea. Apologize for the word.
And when I saw this scene, I feared for what was to come. I didn't know how far Severance would go with this.
I'm sorry.
Again.
And this is when we get the #1 sentence loved by all people on Threads.
Devour feculence.
And something that I wasn't expecting was that back and forth between Mr. Milchick and the statue of Kier. And only an actor like him could do all that scene and right after that perform with the choreography and merriment. He wasn't defeated by that confrontation somehow. And towards the end of season 2, we see innies increasingly care less for Mr. Milchick and the respect that he's owed. And so they slam doors when he asks to leave them open, and they don't respect him anymore. This is a little side note, But as an Italian, I couldn't help myself. I noticed this, that the poor employee from poor branch is Italian. And this is again a stereotype as well. And I don't know if you noticed, but he was the only one drinking from a coffee cup, like the ones that we use in Italy, compared to the coffee mugs that are used in the USA. If you want to see actual cult examples and parallels with Severance, there are a couple of nice videos I found, for instance, comparing Scientology and Severance and others, but there was one cult that came to mind as well, which I hate deeply, because the cult leader chose to change his name into something that sounds just like my name. Because I don't know if you're aware, but my name is Rael. And this idiot decided to use this spelling instead, but to use a name that is actually female, but doesn't matter. The point is that he misused my name, and the entire cult is named after him. So it's Raelianism. And you can see a documentary on Netflix, and it's quite disturbing. Linguistic landscape. All locations, signposts, landmarks in Severance are named after the Eagans or are related to Luhmann in some way. And we have countless examples: the birthing retreat, the neighborhood Irving lives in, the names of the city, state, and so on. And you even hear Regabi say they know people at the morgue on the payroll like everywhere else in Kier, because they literally own the town, or at least we can assume that. And this could be yet another way to look at cults and the language that can be used to indoctrinate or to persuade new members, because you are literally surrounded by Luhmann. And this is what we call in linguistics linguistic landscape, which is something that we focus on, for instance, if we want to empower a certain minority language, we start working on the linguistic landscape and we try to add more material, texts, handbooks, but also signposts, landmarks written in that language so that people can be surrounded by that language and it becomes more familiar to them. I'll link a paper down below if you want to read more about this topic. And finally, a mention to numbers. First, let me ask you what you think about this. Maybe it doesn't mean anything, but I don't know if you noticed, there are a couple of times in which we hear a number that is oddly specific. See, for instance, when Miss Huang accompanies Dylan to his first meeting with Gretchen, and she says, "You've earned an 18-minute visitation event." And when we are seeing the funeral of Irving, we hear Milchick saying, "Let us take 9 seconds." And I was wondering, does this have to do with the 9 core principles? Since 9 and 18 are related numbers in this sense, why do you have to pay your respects for 9 seconds? So I don't know. Maybe it doesn't mean anything. But in this show, we can see numbers having different meanings. Numbers are universal and can be assigned the value you want, because numbers can create things, see for instance software engineering, and they are a type of language that you learn separately, any programming language. In Severance, Indians don't know why they are working with numbers, but they know they need to feel something for them to be refined. Hence, emotions and a basic human response are the way Indians interpret numbers on the screen, which are cryptic by definition. For example, when Marc explains to Helly what they're doing, he says, "All the data comes from upstairs fully encoded. Each category of numbers presents in such an order as to elicit an emotional response in the refiner." And see, for example, at the beginning of Counterpart, which is a TV show I recommended you in the video about if you like Severance, you should check out these shows and movies. And so at the very beginning of Counterpart, it's not a spoiler, the protagonist works in a secret field and he cannot know what's going on. He works with a partner sitting in front of him, but they do not have any contact. There's a glass. They never meet outside and they're not allowed any communication other than code words, nonsensical words, at least to them, and they are given these words in folders. So they meticulously follow the rules in a highly controlled setting, unaware of the job they're doing. In counterpart, cryptic words and mundane sentences are used to convey meaning, a meaning that workers don't know. In Severance, numbers are used instead, and we only learn about these numbers later on in the second season. But for the most part, we have no clue what's going on. We only know that Innies need to feel something.
You must eradicate from yourself childish folly.
So as you can see, Severance's language is more than just corporate jargon. It's also a mix of cult-like control, dark humor, and slogans, some of which are stuck with us, the fans of the show. And if you haven't yet left your favorite phrase from the show in part 1 of this video, please leave it down below here and let me know how you use it. What's the context? Do you use it at home, with your family, with strangers online? At first, when I saw people using Praise Kier online, I was a bit shocked. But now I get it. I mean, of course we are just joking, but it's also a way in which we can show our appreciation for the show. Because the more you hear it, the more you use it, the more it sounds appropriate in certain contexts. See, for example, here on Threads, after rewatching both seasons to prepare for these 2 videos, I wrote this, and a member of Choreography and Merriment left a comment, which made my day, by the way. But in that thread, I used the words Praise Kier, because it really sounded the right thing to do, you know? Even though, of course, it doesn't make any sense. And I would never do that in real life, I think. But this tells you something about how powerful the language in Severance is and how well written the whole series is. I mean, incredible. This show needs to get all possible awards because, come on. So now that you watched this, check out this video next. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss my upcoming videos. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.